Hi everyone, welcome to the session on the police-prison nexus and radical social-ecological transformation. So we are about 1 year ago, on November 16, 2019, in a street of Paris. This is the day after a yellow vest demonstration, and the chief of Paris police, therefore one of the highest level police officer in France, Didier Lallemand, who was nominated by Emmanuel Macron himself, is inspecting the place where the demo took place the day before. And a woman around tells him that she is part of the yellow vest, and Didier Lallemand replies, and I quote, "We are not in the same camp, madam," and simply continues walking. In the USA, the murder of George Floyd by the police amplified the Black Lives Matter movement, giving rise to demos and riots that were fiercely repressed and to many calls to defund the police. In France, the Yellow Vest movement that started in November 2018 was met with police violence and judiciary repression using methods that have been experimented for decades in working class and immigrants' neighborhoods. After no more than 2 years of wide public discontent with police violence, and after having denied the very existence of police violence in France, the government just voted this week a law that makes it almost impossible to shoot videos of the police. In Algeria, the security services played a key role in repressing the hierarchy that started in 2019. And as we speak right now, the police-prison nexus is very strongly at work to terminate the revolutions against Lukashenko's dictatorship in Belarus and against the attacks on abortion and women's rights in Poland. These are only a few recent examples of the way in which the police-prison nexus is a key mechanism in hindering progressive movement and contestations in modern societies, including in so-called democratic societies prone to depict themselves as human rights champions. As theorized in particular by Foucault in Discipline and Punish, the prison is a population and labor force management tool whose primary social function is to maintain social hierarchies and enforce exploitative social relations. We have today with us Serge, who will present a critical and abolitionist perspective on prisons. Serge is an anti-prison activist from Paris, engaged with L'Envolée, a magazine and radio show providing a space for current and former prisoners to talk about their life in prison, about their treatment by police guards and the administration, or about the material and psychological condition of detention. And Serge was also a member of GENEPI, a student association delivering courses and workshops in prison to foster rehabilitation. But prison would not work without police, whose social function is similarly to maintain order, primarily the order of the dominant class and of the high bourgeoisie. In that regard, police violence is a key disciplining tool aiming at dissuading citizens and activists to contest social hierarchies and exploitative relations. We have today with us Angelika Adensamer, who will talk to us about the social role of police and police violence in capitalism. Angelika is a lawyer and criminologist from Vienna who specializes on police violence, surveillance, and the right to demonstrate, and has published extensively on these topics. Angelika is also a co-founder of Links and was one of the party's 3 chief candidates for the recent municipal elections in Vienna. The police-prison nexus is therefore instrumental to capitalism. Its strengthening and deepening in democratic societies are a condition of the generalization of the precariousness and of the emergence of societies of social insecurity. To paraphrase the sociologist Loïc Vacan, the police-prison nexus acts as the vacuum cleaner of the labor market. However, the topic of police and prison are under-considered in the degrowth community. For instance, the word police only appears twice in Dalisa de Maria and Cali's 2014 books called Degrowth, a Vocabulary for a New Era, while the word prisons appears 4 times, including metaphorical uses, and none are treated as topics in themselves. Another example is the very recent book, Exploring Degrowth by Liege and Nelson, published in 2020, where the word police only appears 5 times while prison is simply absent. And the recent conference, Strategies for Degrowth, did not include a single session or presentation on the topic of police and prison. This lack of awareness and collective thinking is problematic as political stages are huge. A degrowth society would involve a complete revamp of the social organization and of key social relations. It would thus collide with the police-prison nexus as maintainer of social hierarchies and labor force management device. At both theoretical and political levels, thinking of radical social-ecological transformation requires structured analysis and narratives on the police-prison nexus, on its social role, and about possible alternatives. Hawzhin Azeez will tell us about a concrete, radical, progressist, and post-capitalist perspective on alternative and democratic police and security arrangements. Hawzhin is a Kurdish academic, poet, and activist working as an adjunct professor at the Center for Gender and Development Studies at the American University of Iraq in Sulaimani. And Hawzin's worked and lived 3 years in Rojava and wrote numerous pieces about it, including on the abolition of police. Unfortunately, Hawzhin had a health issue this morning and she will not be able to take part in the session, but she nevertheless made the effort to record a video of her intervention that we will watch in replacement of her live intervention. So I would like to warmly thank the 3 speakers for accepting to take part and for being with us today, and I would like to thank all of you for attending this session. As for me, my name is Louison Cahen-Fourreau. As a master's student in France, I was also a member of the student organization delivering courses and workshops in prisons, and I co-facilitated an English workshop in a women's prison for a year, and I am currently a researcher at the Institute for Ecological Economics at the Vienna University of Economics and Business, and I will be facilitating this session. So welcome everyone again to the session on the police-prison nexus and a radical social-ecological transformation. Before we start with Serge, I would like to thank very much the organizers of the Vienna Degrowth Days who made this session possible, and I would also like to thank very much Suni, who will act in the background as tech support for this session. The aim of this session is to introduce critical perspective on prison and police to the degrowth movement and to initiate a discussion so a degrowth perspective can emerge on this issue. You will be able to post your questions and remarks to the presenters in the chat that you can see on the right of your screen. Serge will start on prison, then we will hear Angelica on police and Hawzhin on the Rojava experience, and then the presenter will have a few minutes to react on each other's presentation, and we will move on to the discussion with the public. So Serge, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for organizing this session. So, as you said, I'm part of Envolé, which is a review. There is one here, the last issue, and also it's a radio web show every week on French radio in Paris. And so L'Envolé was created 20 years ago, and it was created in consequence of the end of death penalty in France. In fact, death penalty in France never ends. There is the end of death penalty, but in reality, it was replaced by all lifelong penalty and sentences. And so, lots of prisoners still dying in jail in France. And so, at that time, it was the first consequence of the end of the death penalty end. Because before, when death penalty was still does in France, there is not very long jail punishments, at least 20 years, something like that, but no more. And with the end of death penalty, the long sentences rise up and go until 30 years. And so it was very, very, very long for these people. And these people explains that it was a way of put them out of the society. And so it was the same thing. It was a social death. It wasn't, people wasn't killed, but they were socially dead by it. And these people was the prisoner themselves. And what we do at Envolé is just give the mic to the jailer and their family and friends and everything. And so at that time, so in the early in 2000, there is l'appel d'Arles. So the Arles claim, Arles was a jail. And so it was in 2003. So remind that at that time, iPhone didn't exist. There is not flat TV. So it was something very special at that time that people stole the video material of the jail and made a statement of what's happened in jail and say what they think about society from their jail. And so I think that it's very important to focus on what prisoners have to say. And so that's why I will ask to Louison to read part of this statement, which was very important in France. And that was funny because I look at if this statement was translated in English or German, but it wasn't. But according to me, it's one of the most beautiful text about jail. And so Louison, if you want to put it. And so in back of the picture, it's a screen of the video that you can find, but it's in French.
Yeah, so I will share my screen now and I will read the statement that Serge just talked about. So you can read, we translated it ourselves in English. I hope you can see because with the picture in background it's a bit hard. So the statement reads like that. Before reading the following press release, we must specify that if we present ourselves to you hooded, it is to avoid the personalization of the action in progress. We are only long-term prisoners amongst others. The message we carry is that of thousands of voiceless men and women locked up in French prisons. Furthermore, we would like to point out that it is for security reasons that we wear hoods. Needless to say that the prison authorities will not appreciate our initiative, that the repression that will follow the public release of this document will be significant. The security measures that we have taken may not spare us the sanctions, which is why we ask in advance that associations and citizens concerned with the defense of human rights watch over the Arles Central Prison in the days and weeks to come. This will prevent the occurrence of violence and various abuses committed by supporters of repression. Well, obviously, if the prison world was not a place of lawlessness where the right of expression, of association were forbidden to prisoners, we would not have been obliged to take such action. It is the anti-democratic nature of the prison that leads us to act in this way. Finally, we wish to address a message to all the youth of the project Hawzhin, to all the children of the proletariat and sub-proletariat, to all those belonging to the class of those sacrificed by the system. Yesterday, your parents and grandparents, our parents and grandparents, were transformed into cannon fodder, sent to the front to die defending interests that were not theirs. Today, it is the destiny of prison fodder that is offered to us, that is offered to you. Refuse this tragedy, refuse this logic, become aware of all this before it is too late. For the prison doors are closing more and more on you and for longer and longer, while the real delinquents, those who live on the back of misery, of our misery, of all their arrogance, are stuffing themselves with laughter at our misfortunes, at our sacrificed lives.
Yeah, so that is only a part of the statement, and it's a 13-minute video long. So if you speak in French, do not hesitate to watch it. And so I don't really agree how you present me, Louison. We are not against jail only. We are anti-carceral. What that means is that carceralism is more than only put people in jail. You know that there is a lot of ONG or others that who are fighting for human rights in jail, and that's a good thing. But according to us, jail have shaped all of the society, and it's the question of the control and all of the surveillance. Surveillance, that's a good word in English, Louison. That's all the society that there is surveillance and control, and we are against all of the surveillance and control society. And so, according to us, jail is only the worst part of this kind of society, but is not alone. It works inside all of the society, and we have to fight to change all of the society. And we can't accept that we stop to put people in jail and replace that by more control and surveillance on people, because there is a lot of thing to do. I don't know how to say in English, but bracelet électronique, which means that you have to stay at home, but you're still in jail. You're still very controlled by the state, and all of your behavior is controlled by the state. And so it's important to say that it's not the jail, it's all of the society, which is carceral. And and what it's important for us is to make understandable that that the jail situation shape all of the society. For us, prisons are the laboratory of the control on the surveillance society. For instance, after the first lockdown in France, they say that we will back to the normal. But in jail, it wasn't the case. After the first lockdown, it was a very special situation with you can't see so long your family. The child can't come to the prison to see their father, and so it was a very different situation than before. And it's they saw that it wasn't rebellion inside the school, so inside the jail, and so they understand that they can reduce the liberty for every jailer. And right now, with the second lockdown, they say that when the second lockdown will stop, it will not really stop. You still have to be controlled and have your attestation to say I have the right to go out. And so they test some discipline measure in jail, and then after they applied it for all of the society. And so that's important to understand that jail is part of the society and shape all of the society. Other thing is that prison are not for all. It's only for people who do not accept to be put in boxes. It's poor people, racialized people, activist people, and foreigner. And that is very important for us, that it's present is addressing to very low social classes people. And so it just have to say that these people aren't have access to speak about their situation in media and everything. That's why at L'Envolée we want to give her the mic, and so. And just I want to say about activists in environmental and so degrowth and everything, that in France we have a lot of condemnation. For instance, in Guana, so in Guadeloupe, few activism have been punished of months of jail because they fight against chloridone which is, I don't have the word in English, but it just pollutes all of the anti. And also in Bure, I guess that you know better Bure, which a nuclear center for the west of the nuclear industry. And there is a lot of people who went in jail because they fight there. And there is a ZAD there. And so just to say that just the prison is addressed to the people that is for the people that already are discriminate and have a bad condition of life in our society. And so why we have to fight again all jail, so all of the society of control and everything, it's because prison participate to the economic system. It's the way for poor people to accept their living condition. Because capitalists, and that's what you said, Louison, at the beginning, capitalism needs people accepting low wage. And for doing that, the scare of the jail is very important. If you don't want to be poor, you sometimes have to find some tricks, sometimes illegal tricks, to get richer, and so that's the way how the state put these guys in jail, and so the scare of being a jailer make people accept to work with a very, very low wage and everything. Also, and that is for the future, jail is for refugees. And we don't call this jail in France, we call centre de rétention, but in fact it's jail. And so for the future, with a lot of climatic refugees that will grow up, we know that, we are sure that they will have more and more jail for refugees and jail also for climatic refugees. And also, of course, for activism. And so fight now against jail, it's a way to create the space for fighting and against the social condition right now. And I just want to say that it's very important when you fight against jail to give the speak to the prisoner, as we did at the Envolée. We have 1 hour, one half an hour radio show that give the mic to the prisoner for saying what they live themselves, and we don't need experts to speak for them. They are the first concern, and they have to speak. They know what's happened. They have a political discourse, and so we have to listen them. We have to spread their thought, and so that's just what I have to say. I hope my English wasn't so bad to understand what I said, and so thank you, and please listen the prisoner. I don't know how it's happened. It's in Austria. But it's very important to listen what they have to say.
Thank you very much, Serge. And we'll hear, I guess, about Austria in a minute with Angelica. Just a couple of precision on what you said, because you used several times the word carceral. I'm not totally sure carceral is also a word in English, but it essentially means penitentiary. So it refers to the whole system and not only to prison. And the chlordécone to which you referred as well is this pollutant that has essentially destroyed all the soils in Guadeloupe, and that was massively used for the culture of bananas in Guadeloupe. And now activists revolting against that are enjailed. And in France, we have actually a special police section, a special police group called Demeter that was created a year or two ago, whose charge is specifically to monitor so-called radical ecologist group that may attack industrial agriculture and industrial farms and so on. So, Angelica, if you're ready, it's your turn. We cannot hear you. No. Okay, so Angelica will just exit and re-enter the room to see if that solves the sound problem. In the meantime, you can feel free to write remarks and questions you may have in the chat. So we will react to them in the discussion after the interventions. Okay, so Angelica is back.
Hello.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, with the microphone now. Okay, hi. Sorry for the short delay. I'm here now. So I want to start with talking about what Louison has also mentioned in the introduction, that the police has started and still is an institution that is supporting and basically keeping intact as the economic system that we have, or that is very linked to the economic system and to the economic elite and bourgeoisie today. There are several historical examples to support this. There's the history of police in Europe, where we can see that the first police institutions have started in a time when, or like a structured police that sort of organizes all of life, and especially also everywhere in life, has started with the shift of feudalism to industrialism. So when people move to the cities, when their old social structures have weakened, and social control didn't work in the ways that it had before, there had to be a new thing, a new structure that could enforce a social order, so to say, to make people work, to protect property, and to also keep them in the places where they were supposed to. And I find it quite interesting because some of these functions are really still very obvious when you look at police today. There's a question, for example, very early policing consisted in a very early police duty was to prevent fragrancy, so to prevent people from moving to other parts of the country where they were not supposed to live, and to have a control of the population, really, and who lives where. And fragrancy was a crime, basically, so you were not free to move. And you are not today either. So today, a big part of policing also is the control of migration, of borders, and it's a very racialized construct as well. So it's always also been a question of ethnicity, of control of ethnicities in places and of populations, and that linked with a certain protection of workforce, of making people work, and keeping them in place. In the US, this is also very obvious when you look at how it was linked, how the early police was linked with the institution of slavery. So the first police forces were used to keep or to catch slaves that had run away, and to bring them back to their owners. And we also still see the system, the police and the prison system in the US to be very racially connotated and to have a very racializing hierarchical function. So in that sense, I think we can. I think the analysis really is. It's an old analysis really that the police works to enforce capitalism and to enforce an economic system. There have been Marxist thinkers like Pashukanis about the state and law and the function of police who have said this the end of 19th century already. There's some newer theories as well. I'm going to just to mention that if I mention names or something, I will later put some of my sources because I don't have a presentation, but I will put the names of some of the books I draw this on in the chat later, so you can copy it, or like if you're more interested in where all this theory comes from. Yeah, so the police works to put down strikes, to stop riots, to force people to work. That's a very established theory, and I think it historically also really holds. And I think sometimes even, I mean, that's a question because it's also very known. This argument is very known for prisons as well. Foucault has made this argument for prisons as well, and I think it's in a way in Europe even more true for the police because not so much production has happened directly in the prison. It's more of an indirect way, and I think. In police, when you look at policing the poor and policing the demonstrations, it's even more clear where this is headed very often. So what I want to question for the rest of my intervention is how does this exactly work? And there have been some theories about this, and it's a bit difficult to define the function of police because. For one, there is an official telling of how the police works, and that is the police is there to execute laws that are democratically voted on, and basically that's all that the police does. And then you can say, well, but the laws are made from the elite, and that's why they have special interests, and then the police has to enforce those laws with the special interests. And that's true to an extent, but I don't think it's true entirely, and there's much more paradoxes in there that I will get into. And the second reason, so the first reason is I think that the official version is just not so true, that the official version that we are taught is not true. And then a second difficulty in understanding this is that we don't know very much about how the police really work. So some of the knowledge that we have about, so there's not much documentation about police violence. It's very hard to hold police accountable for violence. It's kind of a murky area. There's a lot in secret, a lot of, even if it's happening on the streets, undocumented. So we don't really know what's happening inside the police, and we don't know how it really works in practice. So we have to sort of make some guesses as well on punctual events. So when we see, for example, in demonstrations, when there's big demonstrations in the street, we can gain some knowledge about how the police works and what interests they have, but less so in just everyday controls and stops, because it's much harder to investigate. But so there are two. So there's a theory by Brodeur, and he sees two functions in the way of the police, and one is instrumentality, and that is sort of close to the official one, where the police is an instrument of the ruling class and they use it, and that's it. But then he says there is also a different function. It's called insularity, and in this function the police also has an autonomous, is an autonomous actor. And I think that's a really important aspect to keep in mind. I think, and this is also really not new, but the police is a political actor in itself. The police has very often their own political interests. That's, first of all, it's institutional interests. It's the interest to have more funding, more people, more power, more technology, to also use. So there's a big market in security technologies. So there's an interest to give these, to buy expensive technology from maybe connected enterprises, maybe making a gain when you buy these very important, very expensive technologies. So that's interests, for example, that they pursue. They pursue this also in legislation. So whenever it's about police powers, the police is usually a very strong actor in wanting these powers and in also consulting governments to do that. So they basically become, or they're treated also in the media as experts for their role and for their function, without taking into considerations that they have an interest in gaining those powers. So the police would say, well, you know, whatever is not working for what you think is not working in police, it's always because we don't have enough power. And we tell you this as experts because we know what we're doing. We don't have enough power. We don't have enough resources. So give us more. It's not ever, there's not ever an independent institution that can say, well, wait a minute, actually you have a lot of power and you seem not to be using it right, or not in the way it was intended to, and how would giving you more powers actually change anything? That doesn't happen because no one knows from the outside. There is no independent control, and the police has an interest to always get more of this. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Then there's, of course, also a political, there's also political interests that are not only related to institutions, but they also have, so police is often very right-wing. We can see this in their unions. So the police also has, or the police officers, especially the higher ranking ones, often also have a political agenda that they might want to, that might not necessarily be the same as the government's, and is, yeah, often more right-wing, and we could see this in how they treat different right-wing or left-wing demonstrations, or what they see as orderly and what is not orderly, and that's also a part in how they use their laws. So I think you will have to see the police as an independent actor, and I think it will make some things clearer, but it also will make them less coherent between the government and the police. And then finally, what I find very interesting in terms of understanding how police is used today is a theory also by Brodeur, and I've read it in a Fassin article, is what they call a great check. So basically, what has been happening through the years is that the police gets a very broad scope of discretion. That means that they can, they often have laws that are very broadly defined, and the police can choose how to use them and how to interpret them. And that's very often, I mean, sometimes maybe governments don't, it's sometimes easier to do it that way, and maybe sometimes governments don't really know how to do that. We have seen it with Corona measures very often, that they have made very confusing laws, at least in Austria, about the lockdown. No one really knew what was allowed, what wasn't, and some exceptions that allowed you to go out were very unclear and so on. And then in the end, it's the police that has to make a sense of this and that has to interpret this. The same is with surveillance measures, and even with penal laws. They often have very broad definitions. And so they say what this does, or the theory of Brodeur that says this is used to mask what the real intentions of this is. So basically, the government says you can do the scope of things, and we don't really openly tell you what you're supposed to do with this, but also the police understands what they're supposed to do. So basically, the government gets a way to pretend not to give these orders, and the police can pretend not to follow those orders, but in some implicit way they do. And that gives some sort of, that masks the real intentions of a government. I think what's a good example of this is very often racialized profiling, because some So some laws really sort of in their argument by the government are very racialized. So the idea, for example, of drug dealers on the street is very racialist. It's Africans, or the idea of radicals is very racialized because it's Muslims. And then you are not allowed to make laws in the Western democracies. You cannot make laws to just target these people that you find disturbing on the street or you find dangerous, but you have to make the laws much broader. You have to make them more neutral. But then it's still implicit what they mean, and the police knows what it means, and the police is on the street only controlling black people for drugs and not white people, even though white people also take drugs. They also walk around with drugs, but they wouldn't be controlled by it, even if the law says all drug usage is, all carrying drugs is forbidden for everyone. They still only enforce it on a certain set of people, and it's still implicitly very often also argued this way by the government who made these laws. So in this way, you would mask what you actually mean with these police powers. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at a more complex working together of government and laws and policing. Yeah. Basically, in terms of defunding, and so there has been a big debate about defunding police, and I think that's really, really important, and it's really good. I think it's very hard to control police in a progressive way for the reasons of how it works autonomously. I think it will be extremely difficult, even if you'd have a radical leftist government, to bring police under control, and I think it's nearly impossible. I think a progressive claim always has to be to lower police functions and to cut them down and to defund them. And I think it's really important to keep this in mind, even in other aspects of a progressive program. I think it's sometimes happens that also progressives then want high punishment for something they find really bad. They want high punishment for, I don't know, molesters, or they want high punishment for environmental crimes. But I think we really have to be careful that that doesn't go a progressive way ever. And I think it's not going to work. I think we'll have to always find social solutions for social problems. And yeah, finally, I would. I mean, I've brought the example of. I think all these things are demonstrated and nicely in examples like in how demonstrations are cut down in border policing, which I've also mentioned already. And I could bring some of these examples later in the discussion, but I think I've been already talking for some time. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Angelica, for this super interesting presentation. So I will now play the video of the intervention by Hawzhin. So Hawzhin told me her video is way too long compared to the time of her intervention, so she asked me to start it only in the middle, when she started to concretely talk about alternative arrangement, as she could observe them in Rojava. So I will do it. So I apologize in advance if the video starts in the middle of a sentence. I will see with Hawzhin if she's okay for us to upload the whole video somewhere, so everyone has a chance to watch it fully later. So I'll share my screen with the video now. All right, so you should be seeing it right now, and I'll start to play it.
Which has encouraged new types of policing systems or security systems to be developed. And I think without this ideology, it would not be possible to have the kind of security systems that are being established, which are more just, which are a lot more egalitarian and democratic and more pro-society, and pro-democracy than the kind of police systems that we are seeing. I think, looking at what's been happening in the United States and with the whole crisis that occurred and had been occurring for many, many years, that kind of really came to the forefront of the international discussion around policing and the prison system, is with the unjust murder of George Floyd, and we saw the kind of riots and the justifiable anger of the communities in relation to this ongoing racist, white supremacist murder of Black bodies and Black people. And so this has really raised a lot of questions about the way in which we've organized our societies and the kind of institutions and systems we allow every single day to operate and to control and to monitor us. So I think I want to come back to this idea that what's happening in Rojava is that we've recognized in Rojava that the kind of systems and the kind of society that we want to live in and have lived in are all socially constructed. The police system is socially constructed. It's an institution that has really, existed for just over 100 years. It's a socially constructed idea, and just as it is a socially constructed idea, it can be deconstructed, and we can construct new systems and new ways of existing. So looking at Rojava as a result of these pillars of the three pillars of direct democracy, women's empowerment, and ecological sustainability being non-negotiable elements of the way in which society lives and coexists with one another. And all of these quotas and cooperatives and communes that create a very intimate, interlinked web of connections and relationships and civil society and democracy across society, it really has politicized communities. And mind you, this is again a community which is very underdeveloped, has high rates of illiteracy. People were barred from having access to higher education or even basic education in many cases, and often when they did have access to education, it would be in the language of Arabic and in different languages as opposed to their own mother tongues. So the kind of new systems that are implemented across Rojava is three pillars, okay? Again, three systems. I'm sure you've heard of the People's Protection Unit and the Women's Protection Unit, the YPG and the YPG. They're kind of sort of like the military system that protects the community from outside forces and threats such as ISIS or, the Turkish system's, fascist and ongoing system of violence and land annexation and terrorism towards the Kurdish people, towards other minorities such as Christian communities, Armenians and Yazidis in the region. So the YPG and the YPG operate solely in protecting the community from external forces. Then just below the YPG and the YPG, we have the Asayish system, and then parallel to them we have what is called the Civil Defense Forces, also known as the YPG. So the Asayish is kind of almost on an ideological and on a practical level similar to the police system, but although they're sort of disempowered on many levels. The Asayish's role is to protect the city on the local level. Okay, so the YPG on the larger regional level, the region of Rojava, the Asayish protects the cities and the larger regions from external forces, from terrorist forces coming from one region to another, perhaps from the central and southern parts, or the parts where Turkey and its allied jihadist forces are attempting to implement instability and all kinds of violence towards communities. They are also responsible for addressing crimes committed, and of course, I mentioned that Rojava is a very small region and the communities know each other. These are small farming regions and small towns and communities, and almost everybody knows each other. But that doesn't necessarily mean that crimes, theft, abuses, domestic violence, all kinds of kind of low-level petty crimes don't occur. They do occur. And so the Asayish is responsible for investigating this, if there's been an accusation of something. Mind you, the Asayish is almost, has that 40% quota. So there are women's Asayish forces who solely deal with gender-based and gender-related issues. If there's domestic violence, if there's an honor killing, if there's a forced marriage, if there's any sort of an issue relating to gender and violence towards women, the women's forces go in. Under this concept that women feel more comfortable speaking to other women, and that women naturally understand each other more, especially because probably most of them at some point or another, previous to the revolution, hopefully, would have experienced some of the gender-based abuses and violences that were prevalent across society. So the Asayish is very much divided between the two genders, and they are responsible for sort of investigating issues and crimes that occurs within society. If there needs to be an arrest, if there needs to be an arrest of a woman, if she has committed some sort of a crime, it's the women's Asayish forces that go and arrest her. You will never see a man going and arresting a woman. That just doesn't occur. The society in Rojava is very, 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 very aware of the way in which women have been disempowered and the capitalist sexist system, and so all kinds of processes and mechanisms from women's only safe spaces, the women's village of Jinwa, which I had the privilege of being one of the sort of the designers. My NGO actually designed the village of Jinwa. Women's houses, women's NGOs, women's anti-domestic violence organizations, civil society organizations, all kinds of institutions are organized so that women have access to legal mechanisms and to justice and to repatriation and ways of addressing conflicts and issues in their lives that are gender-based. So the Asayish protects the society from external forces, but also from internal forces wherever a crime may occur. Then you have the Hapaja, the civil defense forces, and this is really, really interesting. So the Rojava region is a region that is under constant attack by outside and external terrorist organizations. There are a multitude of different terrorist organizations at the borders waiting to invade. ISIS, although it has been sort of declared internationally to have been eliminated, it hasn't. It is reformulating and constantly reorganizing itself, partly also because it's being armed and funded and supported by Turkey across the border, but also Turkey's ongoing invasion and annexation and bombings and all kinds of illegal international behavior that Turkey is engaging towards the region as well. So as a result of this, the Hapaja acts as a secondary protection unit, largely because in 2015 there was a secondary, Kobani had been liberated in late December, early January. The liberation of Kobani was widely declared, and then a couple of months later, a group of ISIS, a brigade basically enters through the Turkish border, blew up the Turkish gateway that separates Turkey from Syria, from Rojava, and entered and engaged in a wide-scale massacre, going house to house, murdering people in their beds at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, and they were dressed as the Yepaga units, so people were very confused about why the Yepaga were knocking on their doors and wanting to enter, and then when they entered, they were shooting people. So the Hapaja formed as a result of this extra security need, and they often protect society during festivals, major events, ceremonies, martyr ceremonies, any sort of an official event that is held wide scale and in which security may be an issue. But they also patrol their neighborhoods, only their own streets. And so you'll have a bunch of Hapaja from one neighborhood who are controlling or would stand in the early evening or afternoon and would monitor the community at night until first thing early in the morning, where the chances of any kinds of crime or any sort of a terrorist attack are exponentially increased. And they would stand at strategic points, and people know each other, people know who lives in the community, people know who is a member of this street or that street, and so they know each other. So it's a community protecting each other. It's the community providing security for each other. And it's very important to say that the Hapaja, only in the case of some sort of a terrorist crime or some sort of obviously, if they're watching somebody breaking into their neighbor's house, they're going to, it's kind of like a citizen arrest. They can actually arrest people. And they work hand in hand with the Asayish forces to take these people to court and have the judicial justice system implemented. And of course, they have an entirely different type of a judicial system that occurs at the community level. And if the crime is petty or if something that can be resolved, it's usually the community elders, men and women, that come together and they have a decision. They speak to the person who has committed the crime. Why did you commit this crime? Is it poverty? Is it mental health? What kind of issue? Is it domestic instability? And they try to actually work with some of the other institutions, such as the Women's House, the cooperatives and communes, to see what the needs of that particular individual is and why they committed that crime, as opposed to simply taking them, throwing them into a jail and then throwing away the lock and not caring what happens to that person. So the system in Rojava is not geared towards punishment, it's geared towards rehabilitation, but it's also geared towards understanding that the people who commit these crimes are members of our own families and communities and streets and neighborhoods. And so that kind of cultural norms and practices around honor and ethics really helps to create a system of shame, which prevents a lot of people from engaging in crimes. But where crimes do occur, the community comes together and everybody becomes aware, and it's not something that you can hide, and it's not something that you have the capacity of having personal privacy, where I've just engaged in theft or rape or murder or something along those lines, and I get to maintain my privacy. The entire community engages in discussions. The cooperatives come together, the communes come together. Why did this crime occur? What can we do to prevent future crimes? Let's go and speak to the family of the person who committed the crime. What can we do to support you? Is there a particular problem that you're experiencing that the community can support you with? So where a crime is committed, it's the community's responsibility. It's not the person, the criminal's responsibility. It's not an isolated case. It's a social problem that needs to be addressed, and the entire community on multiple different institutions come together and they address what needs to be done. Sometimes laws have been changed. Sometimes institutions have come together and they've engaged in discussions. Some have really promoted the idea of having prisons and imprisoning people for an extensive period of time. But the idea more in Rojava is aligned with the notion of there's no point in imprisoning somebody. This is a capable member of the community and they could be contributing back. So let's see what we can do, instead of getting them to, be sitting in prison for 6 months or, 3 years, get them to participate actively and to be monitored in their community events, to become a member of a cooperative, to participate through the cooperative in learning a trade and possibly even, supporting their own family. So the kind of ideology of this democratic confederalism is very, very pro-society, whereas what we're seeing in the Western world with their police systems is very anti-society, it's very hierarchical, it's very oppressive, it's very much geared towards white supremacy, it's very much, anti-queer people, anti-trans people, anti-brown people, anti-immigrants, anti-refugees, anti-anyone who is other and who is different and who is feminized and who is ostracized by this sexist capitalist system. So the fundamental thing that I want to leave you with is that if we want to see change in our societies, we need to really see changes across the kind of ideologies that exist, because you can't have a capitalist system and envision a new system of, non-policing, because the capitalist system is hierarchical, it's sexist, it's oppressive, it's racist, it's anti-ecology, it's about destruction and domination and hierarchy, and so that kind of ideology will always breed the kind of institutions and organizations such as the police system in the United States and the kind of white supremacist ideology that permeates across this institution, which is very, very terrifying, I think. Whereas in Rojava, when you see the hafajis, when you see your uncle and your cousins and your sister and your mom standing on the street corner, you have that connection, that personal connection, you have that accountability, and you know that if you do something wrong, there are multiple ways in which you can get your ass whooped without having a police, basically shooting you because, you're playing with a toy gun. So this is very, very important, and I think, another element of what's happening with the Hapaja and the Asayish and the Yapaja is that everyone across society at some point or another has gone through some sort of a military training to protect themselves and their community and their family. And when they go to this training, there's widespread training across society to implement and introduce the concept of democratic confederalism, radical democracy, women's empowerment, and ecological sustainability across society. And so by the cooperatives and many of the communes, regular educational seminars are held. Some of these educational seminars go for weeks, a month, 3 months, 6 months. People are in these educational seminars for 6 months learning about their civic duties, about the history of capitalism, about the history of colonialism, about the way in which gender and the patriarchy, gender oppression and the patriarchy was implemented, about environmental destruction and degradation, what they can do to live in a more, civil, democratic society. And so through the institutions, through the education systems that are happening, and almost everybody at some point or another has gone to some of these educational seminars, we call them perwada in Kurdish, and you are encouraged to repeatedly go to these seminars. Some of these seminars are based based on gender, some of them are about radical democracy. What is radical democracy? What does it involve? What are your responsibilities as a citizen? What do you have to do? And of course, anti-capitalist and anti-colonial and all kinds of history lessons that are repeated across different cooperatives and communes that really educates and arms society. And I think that's the fundamental thing that I want to say. It's not the weapons that protect the community. It's not even the different institutions that protect the community. It's the ideology which people are actively educated towards constantly. Participating in 3-day seminars, participating in 1 month Parwada, participating in 3 months Parwada, and so on. And so society has gained a deep awareness and understanding of where hierarchies occur, how to resist hierarchies, that their participation across multiple different cooperatives and communes and different institutions helps them to gain a higher level of involvement and become more politicized and more invested in what happens in their communities, where crime occurs, where there's injustice, where there's any kind of inequality that occurs, and the community comes together and there's a lot of dialogue and discussion. I don't know how long I've been talking. I think I'm maybe a little bit over my time. I want to go back again to what I started this conversation with by saying that the system in Rojava isn't necessarily perfect, and they're still trying to address a lot of their internal conflicts and problems. They're working very hard to address racism. They're working very hard to address sexism. They're working very hard to really reinforce the notion of the importance of the ecological, social ecology, as well as the idea of, fighting against imperialism, that just because the Kurds are a dominant group and force in the north, it doesn't mean that they have to dominate and oppress other minorities such as Armenians and Christians and so on. And so a lot of these discussions, these anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-imperialist and pro-ecological discussions and dialogues that are being held, all help to move society forward towards progress and towards a more just and equal society. Is Rojava the most just and equal society that exists in the world? I'm sure there would be many that would disagree with it, but there are definitely aspects of this system that are very, very, very important and very profound for the implications in relation to having and creating a more just and equal society. So I really encourage everybody to read a little bit more around Rojava, to see what kind of systems and institutions they are implementing, to see how they are resisting the hierarchical structures of the capitalist modern nation state, how they are resisting the capitalist system, how they are trying to redistribute wealth within and land within society so that they can allow the community to develop a certain level of economic stability. And of course, the cooperatives really, really help in that regard. Having said that, I'm very well aware that some of the cooperatives failed. Some of the cooperatives just didn't work, and then so the community had to come together and form different kinds of cooperatives. So let's say, for example, they had cooperatives to bake bread in the community, and that didn't work because they had massive factories that would kind of distribute mass bread, for example. Whereas they thought that perhaps if they had, cooperatives that would create locally produced jams and chutneys and something along those lines, that kind of product actually sold much better, and the community was more invested in these kind of products and consuming these kind of products. So everything that we live, the societies that we live in, all of the institutions, the way that we think, the way that we behave, from our gender to our sexuality, all of it is socially constructed, and all of it can be socially unconstructed as well. So think about ways in which you can challenge yourself as an individual to deconstruct some of the patriarchal, sexist, racist, capitalist behaviors and attitudes that you have, and then look around, connect with like-minded people, see what kind of conversations that you can have, especially in the period of COVID, where social distancing is so necessary, but also has really disintegrated and dissolved a lot of community bonds and a lot of activists and the kind of profound work that they were doing to support their communities. We really need to, as activists, as academics, as people from the left, as feminists, as ecologists and environmentalists, really need to come together and formulate alternative ways of supporting our communities, because more than ever our communities are suffering. More than ever there's economic inequality becoming more and more prevalent and more obvious. And of course we know that there's a lot of injustice within our political systems across the world, wherever you may live. So it starts on a personal level. It starts from a personal decision and commitment to live in a radically different way by committing myself to educating myself about the kind of different systems and organizations and institutions and revolutions and changes that are occurring in Rojava, in Latin America, in Asia, in different parts of Africa, across the Middle East, and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and finding and collecting like-minded people and working with each other with the profound belief that we are all good people and we want to work together, and we aspire towards cooperation and aspire towards creating a more democratic, more equal and just society where every single one of us is capable of leaving their house without fearing, especially if you are Black or a person of color, of being abused, of being executed by the police, or being picked up by the security forces of the government, to being subjected to all kinds of arbitrary violences from the state. And so we need to empower societies and communities. We need to build bridges between communities, and this is why communes are such an important aspect of building these bridges, such an important aspect of politicizing society to defend themselves, to find ideologies that work for them, and to find mechanisms and institutions that allow them to protect themselves. So I would like to leave it there. I do apologize. I'm really not sure how long I've been talking, and I wish I could be available to take some of your questions. I know I've really rushed through this. I really apologize, but the most important thing that I want to leave with you is that we have to have hope. And despite what we are seeing with COVID and the pandemic and all kinds of injustices being amplified, we must believe that a better world is possible. We must believe in our capacity to implement change, every single one of us. But when we are united with a common goal that is for the best of everybody in the community, we are capable of bringing about profound change and progress, equality and justice within our societies. So thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you so much for listening to me. I will leave it for Louison to pass on my email to anyone who wishes to ask me a question, or if you just want to engage in a dialogue with me, I would be more than happy to respond. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you very, very much for everything, and I hope that the rest of the seminar is very informative and educational for everybody. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Azeez, for this quite powerful intervention. Very inspirational, I think, and gives us a bit of hope. So, Angelica and Serge, perhaps before we move on to the discussion with the rest of the audience, you would like to react on what you heard until now. Otherwise, I have a couple of questions for you to start the discussion. All right. So something I found quite interesting in Hawzhin's speech is how she describes how they've organized themselves in Rojava, and she insists very much on the fact that the territory is under constant attack from ISIS, from Turkey, and so on. And we know that this kind of context can be very much likely to steer very authoritarian and anti-democratic arrangement, but in Rojava it's exactly the contrary. So an immediate thinking that comes to mind is if they manage to do it in such adverse contexts, could not we do it in our societies where normally we have much more means to do it? But then she goes on, Hawzhin, and she also powerfully recalls that capitalism is a little bit like intrinsically reactionary to some extent. And we've seen some example in the US, for instance, of very reactionary self-policing initiative by the people. So first question I would have for you guys is, do you think progressive and democratic security arrangement like the one Hawzhin described for Rojava could be implemented to some extent in capitalist society, even in so-called democratic capitalist societies? Who wants to give it a shot first?
I can. Do you hear me
Yeah.
this well? Yeah. Okay. That was also the first question by Colleen Schneider in the chat, actually. Yeah, it's tricky. I think to some extent we have experiments like this. So, for example, in Austria, you would have something in German called außergerichtlicher Tatausgleich, which is some sort of a restorative justice system where you do address, where you don't send people to prison, but you address social issues, and you have network conferences, especially for young offenders, where you gather the teachers, the families, some other people that are connected to them, and you try to find like a sort of you try to gain this broader view on why that person has offended and why that person had become criminal in a similar way as Hawzhin has described. And that has happened. I mean, that often happens in capitalist countries, and also in countries that don't have a history of this. It is also implemented in countries that have, for example, indigenous groups that have these sort of conflict resolution systems, and that reintegrate them into their colonized democratic system. So you have that in Australia or in New Zealand, and so on. And I think that also shows how paradoxical it all is. So there are very different sets of police. There are intelligence services and secret services where I really don't see any scope of this. And then you have like street level police, where you can have some sort of community policing that seems less violent, where there is more dialogue, and that can exist alongside. And then you can also at the same time have this community policing and restorative justice elements, and you still have a very brutal knockdown of protests and demonstrations. So I think it's really complicated, because just having this in one area doesn't mean that everyone has access to it, that it's a principle that's throughout police, and you would still really have to sort of look at that. And then also, so for example, what Serge said about the prison system always looming in the background, that's also still there. So sometimes we have these restorative justice elements, and people can also, they have to consent to this, because otherwise it wouldn't really make a lot of sense, because they have to also take part in it, take active part in it. So they will be able to, they have to talk about their life situation, they have to talk about their emotions to some extent, but then it's never really it's not a real consent. If the alternative, if you do not agree to do this, you will be jailed. So as long as you have this in the background, there will always be this element of force. So I think it's complicated, because I still would say in an individual case it can be better to have these systems, but also they are embedded in a broader system of force and of violence that is still there, and that is still underlying everything. So it's I think it's very hard to find a definite answer on how much of these systems are good and good to support and even possible.
Thanks a lot, Angelica. Serge, do you want to add up anything on this?
Yeah, just to say that I'm sure that it could have a good police or a smooth police or everything. That shows that there is different function of the police, but it still have to control. But just it control smoothly than hardly with fight and everything. But police still have to control the human behavior, and I think that is a thing that you address, Angelica, is that there is a very strong official discourse about the social function of the police, which is they said that he have to be here to protect us. But in fact, we know that he just have to control the work of Vacan or Foucault. Just explain this very obviously. your question, Lizan, was about if that's possible in a capitalist society. Has Hawzhin, hope I say good, well, the name. When there is some violence act, it's a society failure. And so I'm not sure that in capitalism you could have no police, and because capitalism is authoritarian regime, and so they need this kind of institution to maintain their power, and so I'm not sure. As we said about Anticarceral, how you said, Louison, I don't remind the word you said in English, but so it's all of the society, and we have to make revolution in all of the society to hope that to not have police and everything, but for sure, and it was a very nice example to speak about Rojava. You will have to some institution, social institution to regulate and deal with the violence issue and other. And so I think it's very important. Also, I just want to speak about one book which was called Pour Elle Toutes, for all of them, which is wrote by Gwenala Ricoldo. She's a professor in California University, and she speaks about how it's jail is anti-feminist. And I'm not in the good position because I am a man to speak about that, but she wrote this book. It's available in French, but I guess it will be translated very soon. And it was very interesting to see how a lot of community works to deal with this violence against women, and how jail right now is just not working for fight violence against women and women's and other gender identity for sure, and how jail just affect and women because the woman deal with the social work of their family, and a lot of men in prison are protected and by their mother or their sister, and it's never the father or the brother that will go in jail for have a discussion and everything. So just want to say that. So thank you. Sorry.
Thanks a lot, Serge. I just posted in the chat the reference to the books you referred to. You mentioned Foucault, you mentioned Vacan, and the books are available in English. And this last reference you mentioned by Gwenola Ricordo, Pour Elle Toutes, Femmes contre la prison. So it means for all of them, Women Against Prison, and published in 2019 in French, and as you said, probably soon translated. But if I can ask a bit of a provocative question, like what could we answer or reply to people who might say, okay, but even if tomorrow we have a degrowth society freed of the capitalist social relations, could we really do without some sort of police or prison? Or we would still need to do with crimes, or like what kind of discourse? My question is what kind of discourse we can elaborate to tackle this kind of fears that people might have, because degrowth right now doesn't have such a discourse. So I think it's politically important that we build such a discourse.
I don't know if I understood you very well. You were a bit. The question was if a society is possible without police. Was that your?
Yeah, my question is like, because it's hard to imagine a society without prison and police. So, what kind of my question is more like what kind of progressive discourse we can build as a radical movement, as a post-capitalist movement, to to address this kind of question that people might have, and also to address the fear that might arise, because it can be very fearing to hear that we should not have any police or prison in the society.
I can say to that, I think it's I think the example of Rojava is interesting in this because they do have protection and they have militarized protection, and I still think that's not entirely the same as a police system as we have today. And I think the question sometimes is, when you talk about a society without police, what do you really mean? And when there's what is a police in the modern sense? And it's become so obvious to us today that you would need a police and you need prisons that it's hard to imagine something outside of that. But I think that the way the police is structured and the way the police organizes power is still very specific. So, for example, in some independent, freed areas where they're not state controlled, they have very different systems that you could call police, or you just say it's still so different that we don't call it police. So, for example, in Guerrero, Mexico, they have rotational police. So they do have some people that violently enforce order, of some maybe less violently than otherwise, and maybe the order also looks different and not as in our capitalist democratic states. But what they found important is that coming from a country where there is a lot of police corruption, people don't stay in these positions, and it's not something that you identify with, that it's not a group of like a block of police that you come into, that you form a culture with which what we also say a lot, but rather it's something that you do for some time, and then most people or all people have to do this for some time, so they also know how hard it is, or they know what the difficulties are, and they can learn from each other, and they experience both sides of it in a way. And then the question is, okay, do you call that a police? I mean, it's very fundamentally different, and some things like the police culture, like the use of power, cannot form the same way when police is a profession that you have your entire life. But still, in other ways, it is like a police. So I think it's not so much always a question of police or no police, but it's sometimes better to look at it more detailed, to say what is, how do we deal with violence in a society? Who can use violence, and what do we do if someone uses violence? How do we protect from that? How do we protect vulnerable people from that, rather than just pose the question of police and prisons, which is maybe dissolves if you talk about it more specifically in a way.
Thanks, Angelica. Very insightful. Serge, do you want to add anything?
No, I agree with this question of violence and who is and no, nothing to add. It was very powerful.
All right, so we still have 7 minutes. So please, guys who are attending the session, feel free to post any question or remarks you may have in the chat. A little bit earlier in the session, Marlies asked whether there are special groups that lobby for a different police in France or in Europe in general. So perhaps you know some activist groups that are specialized on those questions that might be of interest for everyone.
Well, what I can say is that I don't know if you're especially interested in France, because I cannot really talk to that. I know in Europe, in Austria, there are a few. I know in some countries, for example, they have initiatives against racialized police controls, because that's something that affects a lot of people, and there are lots of support groups around that. Then there are larger NGOs that deal with police reform, so a very kind of classical NGO kind of thing. For example, Amnesty is often lobbying against police violence and for police accountability. They're having a campaign right now in Austria as well for an independent institution within police to receive complaints and to independently investigate in terms of police violence. So that's something that a lot of NGOs do. Then there are more specific groups that deal with surveillance. That's a big. I've worked in an NGO, Epicenter Works, that dealt with different parts of surveillance, also with general internet surveillance, but then also with police. So there is a large group, European Digital Rights, where a lot of European members also work on police surveillance. Yeah, so I think there's a bunch, and also with very different angles and different focuses, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, in France, it's ACAT, Amnesty for police, but there is not a really one. In my knowledge, there is no only focus on police. Maybe you know once, Louison, but me, I don't. For jail, it's kind of different. There is a lot of small or larger ONG or only a group. But yeah, there is so many, and but L'Envolée, one of them. There is Observatoire International des Prisons, which I don't agree all they did, but that's the fact. The more using the law and the fight by the law in court for have a better sanitary and living condition in France prisons. Yeah, there is some, but I don't know how it's happening in Australia. I really don't know how there is some groups or anything who is fighting against jail. I know that there is some in Belgium, in Switzerland too, in US. That's something very interesting in the book of Gwenala Ricodo, that there is a huge fight in the church in the US against jail, and the community in church sometimes are fighting against jail. And that was something very surprising me as a European guy, because I never were thinking about that, but it was a way of huge activism from in the US against that in some church, and that was kind of very surprising thing that that I read in this book. So yes, that I have to say.
Thanks, Serge. So we still have only 2 minutes left. So I would like to ask a very decisively pragmatic reason. But tomorrow, a degrowth government come in power. Obviously, he won't be able to break immediately with capitalism. So what could be like immediate step he could take to make the security system a bit more progressive or a bit more democratic?
To be fair, I not I don't want to be in government, and so it's not. I don't want to deal with this. You know, there is a in France we say gestionnaire. Maybe it's manager, the best translation to do that. But according to me, all of the governments are manager, and so they put people in box and try to make politics for this kind of box or this box, and me is not my way for doing politics. That's I still have this discussion with a lot of friends. We are involved with political party and everything. It's not my way. I don't criticize other, but it's not my way to do that. And me, it's just I want to give the mic and to people who are living in a very weird condition, and also just to let them spread what prisoners have to say. And I'm sure that if there is a degrowth party who come in power, they will still have jail. I'm scared about that, and so I will still have to make the same activism than now.
Angelica, do you have anything to say on that? Or we don't hear you anymore.
Like this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, then it was off. Yeah, I am not entirely against being in government, and I also I have founded a political party in the last year and I've run for office, so so my answer will be different. I really think that the first steps, and I think they're not so hard in terms of police, would be to cut down. So you cut down on their powers, you cut down on their funding, you cut down on personal resources, and I think that's just and you can do that as slow or as fast as is possible in a given political situation, but I think that has to be the way. And the same goes for prison. You cut down, you have fewer people in there for less time, fewer criminal offenses in the criminal code. You legalize drugs. That's a super important one. You get half of people out of prison alone by that. You don't have people in prison or in detention for deportations and so on. So that's just it. That's the very easy ones, and it's already a lot. So not having people in prison for drugs and for illegal migration is really not something that threatens society in any way. There's not going to be any problem if you do that, any practical problem, but you can save a lot of a lot of pain. You can really I think that's easy steps that you can take, and then you can maybe do more radical things after that, but it will make a big difference, and it's not very radical at all. And I see a question. Should I also answer the question?
Yeah, because, so we're already 1 minute behind, sorry, beyond. But Moritz asked, do you think that there are progressive people in the police forces that you can use strategically for transformation? So are there some progressive forces within the police that could be used as allies, as allies to some extent?
That's tricky. I think there are people in the police that mean well, but I think it's very hard for them inside the police to do anything. So a lot of people that are different in the police leave. People that are migrants and that are not white, they leave. Women leave. Gay people leave, because it's really hard to stand discrimination within the force. That's one reason. The other thing is that they have a military structure where you are not supposed to make allegations that are against someone else. So I've once talked to a young police officer who was very honest, and I think he was a good person in a way. And he said, well, it is known that some of their colleagues are brutal and they're sadists, and it's really, really bad. And he also thinks that's really horrible, but he does not find any way of charging that, of testifying to that without being without fearing for his position, fearing for his social life, because it's all within a group, and for really, so basically that would be a decision of just giving up your job altogether, and you're in there from very young age, so you might be in there from 18 or something, so your entire social life is organized around this. So sometimes there are police whistleblowers that are just before their pension, before retirement, and they do that, and they dare to do that, but very often there is so much pressure, and it's also so hard to even see that would be, that telling on someone in your force would even lead to anything, because there are no trials against police, there are no charges that are often successful. So you would also think, why do I put myself under that danger in my own life for something that's not going to work anyway? So I think they are very confined in what they can do, and I think they'll just stop being so idealistic and just go along with it. I think that's what happens in the very most cases. And it's funny because that guy said that because I was like, wow, what do you think from within can we do against people like that you also say exist, that are really actively brutal? And he said, well, it has to be very, very very strongly enforced from above, has to come from a minister that just goes through with an iron fist. And it's like, yeah, right, that's gonna, I mean, how do you think that's gonna work if there's no support from a police, and you need from the police force from below, you have to have it enforced from on top? So it's a total paradox. It can't work, and it can happen.
Well, just to conclude, in France, we had a recent example of a few policemen speaking up to denounce racism and violence of the police. And the result is that they were harassed by their hierarchy and by the ministry, and they were really silenced. So it really didn't work. All right, I'm sorry, I have to cut the discussion because we are already 5 minutes late, but thank you very much, Serge and Angelica and Hawzhin and all of you for attending the session. And Serge, oh, sorry, you are dying.
No, I want to say that there is union in policemen and prison guards too, which are very, very conservative. And I guess that I don't think that there is progressive people, and this union are very, very powerful. And that is very paradoxal because we have to fight against unions, which normally are on your side. But just to say that union in police and prison guards are maybe the first thing to dissolve, to change police and jail.
Well, that echoes nicely what Angelica explained to us about the autonomy and own political agenda of the police as a social corps on itself. All right. Sorry. Well, on this encouraging or not so encouraging, I don't know, last words. So thanks very much to everyone again, and I encourage you to check the rest of the program of the conference because there are many very cool sessions in the next days. And I think we've seen today that the degrowth movement has still a long way to go to work on those questions. So see you soon. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.